Alright, let's talk about Spider-Noir. So this is one of those shows that released all at once, made it kind of difficult to cover. I love doing weekly episode recaps, but unless I want to do them every single day of the week, the schedule gets a little messy. And what I like to do is once I've seen everything, once I've had enough time to digest the series, go back, do a whole recap video. Talk about characters, plot lines. This is spoilers for everything that happens in the show. I did a spoiler-free video just talking about that I liked this show, which is the big takeaway from that video, I guess. I think the show, Spider-Noir, is really fun. So much so, and this really is how I judge these days. I would tell someone who's not an enormous Spider-Man fan, not an enormous Nick Cage fan, and doesn't usually watch these superhero things, but is generally into like action, adventure, comedies, like someone who doesn't watch every movie in the MCU but did enjoy that Guardians of the Galaxy movie. I think I would tell that person to give this a shot. Not because I think it's perfect or like the most amazing show of the year. It's not Widow's Bay or anything like that, which I also made a video about why everybody should watch. But it does what it's doing really well. It's nice and short. It's 8 episodes. And like I feel like it's at a higher quality than I would expect when it comes to the writing, when it comes to the filmmaking, and when it comes to the acting. And as a Spider-Man fan, someone who enjoys Spider-Man comics, really enjoys the Spider-Man movies, I'm sure someone could make the case that this is one of the best adaptations of a Spider-Man story in live action. It's very contained in a way that like MCU Spider-Man obviously is not, but even in a way that like Spider-Man 3 Spider-Man is not. It has the benefit of being the first season of the show, so we don't have to worry about characters that we liked from the last season who should be around, giving them something to do. Like everybody here is here because the writers want them here. And for that reason, the show's just really tight. I do think people have to buy into this in a way that they don't necessarily for, say, Guardians of the Galaxy, right? Because we're used to the action comedy sci-fi space opera. We know what to expect with that. We don't know what to expect with this. While every so often a neo-noir shows up that people are into, like your Blade Runner 2049s, a really earnest, like not parody take on the noir genre, that is something people are not familiar with, especially not one with a superhero in it. So I think it would take some convincing for some people. And I don't blame people for maybe being a little confused about this show. The other confusing thing about the show is, if I was asked by someone who hadn't seen the show, hey, I watched those Spider-Verse movies, is this the same guy? My answer would be, not really. Technically, it is kind of the same version of this character. However, he does not appear to be from the same universe that Spider-Man Noir is from. So, plenty of elements of his backstory don't seem to match up. And, very importantly, this character says pretty much in the beginning.
Someone once asked me what universe this was. Strange question that stuck with me all these years later. All I could say for sure was it was the only one I knew of.
Because he's not been through the events of Into the Spider-Verse. Now, he's being played by the same actor, Nicolas Cage, and he looks like the same character, so it's easy to understand why people may expect that that's what this character is. And I do think, in a world where this show takes off, is a huge hit, and they want to make more of these, and maybe they do want to connect it to Across the Spider-Verse or Beyond the Spider-Verse, whatever the next one is, I wouldn't be shocked if we do retcon some of this stuff. If that thing he told us about not knowing people from other universes, that was something that maybe he was lying about. One big difference is this character's name is Ben Reilly. It is not Peter Parker. However, and since we're in spoiler territory, here we go. He does talk to himself, I believe, as Peter, and says that he changed his name. So if they wanted, this could totally be Peter Parker. Now, I do think there's one big detail that does not line up, and that's the time frame. We know very little about the Into the Spider-Verse Spider-Noir, but one thing we do know about him is he likes
To drink egg creams, and I like to fight Nazis. A lot.
Whereas this Spider-Noir exists before Nazis. He exists during the Prohibition era, 1920s and 30s. It is a very specific time. Obviously, there could be some overlap, and some of the characters he's fighting could definitely be Germans, maybe proto-Nazis, but I at least was kind of expecting that was what this series was, and it's clearly not an origin story because Nick Cage is in his 60s, so that part doesn't line up easily. So that I say is the biggest hurdle between saying that this version of the character is the same one as the Into the Spider-Verse version of the character. That being said, I think they could always change it. It's comics, who cares? I care a little bit, but not that much. I think one of the things the show does, because I was a little worried when I heard Amazon Prime was producing a Spider-Man noir show. I was a little worried that it would feel cheap. And when I say cheap, I don't mean cheap like a bad production. I just mean cheap like on a budget that stops it from feeling like watching a Spider-Man movie. Because Spider-Man swinging around doing all that CGI, that's expensive. And I would not have been surprised if they chose to have him not really do that very much in the show. And to be fair, he's not swinging around all the time. But I love that the first episode opens with a big swinging fight scene. I was worried, and I think someone in the Discord suggested that shot, which was in the trailer, might be the last shot of the season, and it's like, this is how these always go. And listen, I think I'm gonna come around on the Surf Dracula one of these days. Like, I might make a video defending the idea of the Surf Dracula because of how much it gets cited as something that people hate, when in reality, it's got its uses. But that being said, if this was a Surf Dracula specifically because they didn't want to put him in the Spider-Man suit and have him swing around, then that wouldn't have worked. So that's, I would say, my biggest endorsement for the show. I would recommend this to someone who is not traditionally a fan of these because I think it works really well. There is the issue of the authentic black and white versus true hue color. Which presentation do you want to watch? I don't think it really matters, personally. I've watched not the entire season in black and white, but I watched enough of the season in black and white to get a sense for what the black and white was. And then I went back and rewatched everything I had already seen in black and white in color, and decided in that moment color was more interesting. Partially because even though black and white is labeled as authentic black and white, this feels authentic. Like, while I know that we are watching a noir story, what we're really watching is a story about noir characters in the world where they exist. And this is what their world would look like. If there were more narration, they were playing into more than noir stereotypes, maybe I have a stronger opinion about it and say, oh, it has to be in black and white because that's the only way you can watch something like this. But this does feel like it's enough of a take on the noir genre to merit a presentation that is authentic to what the world looks like. I also think because they wanted to get these real big high contrast images, what they did was make a lot of big choices when it comes to color. And I think the color choices look great. Robbie's got really bright orange suits. Cat's got these very exciting yellow outfits. Even the Spider, who has a largely black and white outfit, you could see in color, his coat is brown. If the color looked bad, I would say the black and white is perfect. If the effects look bad, and if it was shot poorly, I might also be like, black and white is better, because you may be able to use that to hide some of the imperfections of the show. But this show is shot very well. The cinematography is a ton of fun. The series does a lot with interesting compositions, Dutch angles, things like that. It's honestly, besides the Spider-Man stuff, one of the best looking superhero shows I feel like I've seen in a very long time. So I'm not going to say there's a better way to watch it necessarily, but I do think for me, I enjoyed the color version more. Just because it does color better than a lot of other shows that are in color. I will say the thing that really stood out to me on my first watch, in terms of the production, was the sound. It has that very crisp noir sound that I do not know enough about noir to describe to you, so I'm just going to play just random bits of characters talking, and I think you'll see what I mean.
Mr. Riley's a very nice man, but he was just about to leave.
Who told you that?
That you were leaving?
That I'm nice.
Just because I didn't scream doesn't mean I'm an open book. Do you think I'm withholding from you, Mr. Riley?
What if I said I did?
I'd ask why you thought that.
I'd say a lifetime of experience.
With clients?
With women.
So unconcerned with your possessions because you have so little.
You'd be surprised at how much people will fight for what little they have. I'm working a few leads, but nothing concrete.
Could have said that before I got you the drink.
You know, I think the show is really smartly written, especially because this really deliberate dialogue is so important in film noir. And I'm really impressed with what Orion Uziel was able to bring to this. I've seen a lot of the things they've made. Some I quite like. 22 Jump Street, they wrote the screenplay for that. The first Mortal Kombat movie, I think was okay. The Lost City was fine. I would say this is the best thing they've written. It's interesting that the only other comic book superhero property that someone on this team, like the writing team, is known for is Bruce Marshall Romans and Stephen Lightfoot both worked on the Punisher show. Stephen Lightfoot was even the showrunner for that series. And I don't think this has very much in common with the Punisher, besides the element of organized crime, I guess. And dead family, but that's pretty common in superhero media. But yeah, genuinely, I think the writing was excellent. I think the pacing was great. This is only 8 episodes, and I think episodes 1, 2, 3, 4, they tell a story. 5, 6, 7, 8, everything really changes. And it tells a story that's part of the same narrative. But if you were getting a little tired of the intrigue at the beginning of the season, don't worry, it takes a big spin near the midpoint, and the second half of the season, I think, is more interesting. A lot of that comes from the introduction of a character I really liked, but just overall, I think the pacing for this is great. But alright, let's talk about the individual characters, and we'll use this to discuss their arcs and the arc of the show. So let's start with Ben, played by Nicolas Cage. Nicolas Cage is an executive producer for the series. It feels very clear to me that this series exists because Nicolas Cage is a movie star. And I mean like a bona fide big movie star that was talking to Phil Miller and Chris Lord and said at some point, I would do this, because this is not an obvious next step for this character. This seems like something that Nick Cage genuinely enjoys. I think he brings a weird energy to this character. Definitely not the energy I would expect. And I think that is the single choice that makes this show work. If there's one thing that I think could have ruined this show, it's a flatter, simpler, more restrained version of Ben Reilly. Like Nicolas Cage said, this character is mostly Humphrey Bogart and a little bit of Bugs Bunny. And every time you feel familiar with the Humphrey Bogart, this character is very frequently dipping back into the Bugs Bunny. It's something only Nick Cage could do. So not only do I think he's like the only person who could get something like this greenlit, even if it was already greenlit, he's one of the only actors that I think would make it watchable. I like how gross Spider-Noir is, or the Spider. I have a hard time not calling him Spider-Noir and not calling the show Spider-Man Noir, but the Spider. The decision to make his webs black, weird. That is not usually a Spider-Man thing. And organic webs usually aren't a Spider-Man thing either. But specifically, black organic webs, that's, as far as I can tell, usually something that means, oh, you got some venom in you or whatever. And I think the choice to have Ben heal like a spider by getting in that weird position, stuff like that, it's a whole lot of fun. This character is supposed to feel unusual, and we are familiar with Spider-Man as an audience and as a people. He's one of the most famous characters in popular culture, especially one of the most famous ones introduced in the last 100 years. So we know how Spider-Man works, and yet this show manages to make Spider-Man weird in ways that we're not familiar with. I love how loud this performance is, because I think Nicolas Cage gets misunderstood by people who aren't huge fans of his work, and I don't blame them. He's not for everybody. Not every performance is for everybody. But he is known as kind of a meme for scenes in movies like Vampire's Kiss. QRSTUVWXYZ! Or Face Off. Or that Renfield movie, Where's Dracula?
However, I'm the real victim here. I'm the one you swore to protect.
Like, Nicolas Cage is known for these big performances. However, what I don't think comes across in the memes is he really only does that like 3 or 4% of the time. You know, obviously he saves it for these huge moments, and they are very memorable. But I do think there is a subtlety to this performance that is absolutely necessary for a character like this in a noir story. That being said, I think it's very funny when he's loud and he yells and he does weird stuff, like the time when he breaks into that couple's apartment so that he can get his old Spider-Man suit from their wall. That scene is great. I would watch a whole show that's just that. None of the Spider-Noir stuff, just this weird, kooky landlord, or somebody who's doing heists, but specifically just using weird characters to bluff his way through situations. And the other thing I think that's really fun, because obviously Spider-Man, you know, he takes himself very seriously, he's got a strong ethical code, great power, great responsibility, guilt, all that. I like how this version of Spider-Man, the Spider, is careless. He gets drunk, he gets in fights, he accidentally tells people about his secret identity. Leads to him feeling unpredictable, which I think helps bridge the noir performance with the more traditional action series that this really is. But like, if he was all noir all the time, I don't think it would work. And I think because of that, this version of the Spider needs to be a little more chaotic, and that's just what Nicolas Cage does really well. You know, obviously the design of the Spider is fun. He doesn't have the exact same silhouette as the one from the movie. I feel like the animated version of this character is taller. The Spider, when he is in his Spider outfit, crawling around or swinging around, looks like a guy in a suit, but not the same guy in a suit, which is fine. But it is something I can't help but notice. Thought the fighting was creative. I've seen people say they didn't love the transitions between Ben Reilly doing a punch and then running across a bar and then putting the Spider-Man suit on, and it's clearly a different guy who's like 30 years younger doing a more complicated stunt. Like, they didn't feel like the same person. I get that. In some senses, I think that could work because Spider-Man's trying to put on a front, right? He doesn't want people to think Ben Reilly can fight that well. But at the same time, in a lot of these situations, he would be giving it his all because of the stakes. And it is just a limitation of, like, Nicolas Cage being a 60-year-old man. And if there was anybody else that I think could do this, or that I would want to see do this, then maybe I would hope that that actor gets a shot at this so that it can feel more fluid, but there really isn't anyone else that can do this job. All right, so that's enough about Ben Reilly. We'll probably talk a lot more about him. Let's talk about Robbie Robertson, who I would say, shockingly for me, is like the second lead of this show. I am not an enormous New Girl fan. I like Lamorne Morris. Funny in Game Night. He was in a season of Fargo. He was in that weird SNL movie. Robbie Robertson is one of those characters that Spider-Man fans are familiar with, besides just being in the original Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies, that I think we've wanted to see for a while in live action. Partially because it would be nice to see Peter working with the Bugle in these movies, and for reasons that make sense in the movies themselves, it just he doesn't do that as much. In Andrew Garfield world, he does submit the pictures to the Bugle, but like it's over the internet. And in Tom Holland world, J. Jonah Jameson is Alex Jones. So it would be weird for Peter to work with the propaganda outlet, even though that's kind of what J. Jonah Jameson is. But J. Jonah Jameson feels like he is a more honest broker when it comes to the rest of the news. He just hates Spider-Man. But like the Alex Jones version from the MCU is not. But anyway, we haven't gotten much of the Bugle, so we haven't been able to see Robbie on screen. And I don't think Robbie is usually this chipper, but I do think this portrayal of Robbie is perfect for this version of Spider-Man, and I think it does contain the essential traits of Robbie Robertson, which are optimism. He's like the angel on your shoulder telling you the right thing to do, where Jameson's maybe telling you the wrong thing. He's also like Spider-Man, because I do forget this sometimes. Clearly, Ben is an investigator, is a private investigator, but he's not a journalist. He's a photojournalist. Like, Robbie is the main character next to, I guess, J. Jonah Jameson, who is a full-on journalist writer in the Spider-Man universe. So it's very smart to have him be part of the story. I really like pretty much everything they give him to do. Love his connection with Lonnie, and like I was saying before, I love the look of this character. I love his bright orange suits. I like how charming he is and how he's able to use that to get stories. And I appreciate that he's a black man in this time period. And while the show is not about that and not like a really in-depth exploration of the racial politics of the 1920s and 30s, I think it has some moments that get at some interesting ideas that you couldn't get at if this character was J. Jonah Jameson. So I appreciate that. I would be totally fine with this character being ported over to the MCU. It really wouldn't make any sense. It doesn't seem like we're going to get a Peter Parker who works for the Bugle in Brand New Day. But if we do Robbie in the future, I don't know, have Lamar come back for that. Last member of the good guy team, Janet. Fun. This is a very standard archetype. This character, I don't think really has any analog in the Spider-Man universe. But the sassy assistant who is trying to keep the bills paid, like Malcolm and Jessica Jones, you need someone like this here for the main character to bounce off of. I like that where Robbie is sort of a conscience for the Spider, I like how Janet is sort of a conscience for Ben. And like that's why these are two characters and not just the same character, because Ben is playing two different roles. You know, she's fun. Let's talk about the villains. And we'll get to the one anti-hero later. But Silverman, Brendan Gleeson. Absolutely love this character. I am somewhat familiar with Silverman. I wouldn't say I have a great idea for what a Silverman performance needs to be like. He's one of the Spider-Man mobsters. Kingpin or Hammerhead or Tombstone. The most famous thing that he's done in the comics is get his head put into a big robot body. I love how Silverman is charming. In a way that like a mob boss has to have charisma. They need you to feel comfortable when they want you to feel comfortable. And I think Brendan Gleeson's performance just feels very genuine. I love his little speech about the gambler's heart, why this character is able to make it in ways that other characters aren't. And I think you need him to be really charming so that he can switch and become really dangerous on a dime. You know, it's fun that Silverman is a character who, as the show starts, already has all of the power you could possibly want. He doesn't need to get any more. He still wants to have more because he thinks it can all disappear, but he is more representative of organized crime than just a guy. But I also like that he's erratic, you know, because of paranoia or wanting to just keep his guys on their toes. Silverman will make snap decisions. It works to make him a great foil for Ben, who is also charming, dangerous, and erratic. It's all those things. And I love how much these characters get along. I was not expecting, if there was one thing in this series I wasn't expecting, I was not expecting Ben to spend so much time with Silverman, and for that to be such a crucial part of the plot. I also love Silverman's death. Any scene in A House of Mirrors is always fun. This show has even more fun filming it, but I like that it's very simple. I would have been fine with like him getting his head cut off, and then maybe the Doctor or a character like the Doctor like saving it so he could come back in the future as Robot Silverman. But I'm also cool with this version of Silverman, who's just a guy and he's dead, and that's pretty much it for him for now. Alright, let's talk about the three superpowered villains. I guess 4 if you count Addison, but he's not really in it very much. We'll go in order of how much I like them. First, you have the one I like the least, but by default, because I think otherwise he's fine, Flint Marko, aka the Sandman. I think the Sandman effect was cool. It felt very good for a budget version of Sandman, compared to something like Spider-Man 3. And by budget version of Sandman, I mean this character Sandman, but we're not going to have a bee made of sand all the time, so we're going to paint some sand onto his face. I think that was clever. The times when he does go full sand, and when he's like popping the bullets out of his hand from the fight earlier, or when Spider-Man punches him and it punches through some of the sand in his face, like that all looks really great. I guess it just gets back to my issue that I've always had with Sandman, which is that he feels like he should be on another level compared to all the other Spider-Man villains. Sandman, Hydro Man, Electro, not the electricity guy we see here, but like the usual version of Electro, they are like living elements on a team with guy with a glider and really strong guy. And sometimes not even that, on a team with like guy who's kind of acrobatic or like has special boomerangs. So I think this grounded version of Sandman works. I think the thing about Flint Marko here is he's playing a very specific role, and that role is tough gangster boyfriend who's kind of maybe got a heart of gold. He's got this tragic supervillain origin, as well as this power that's killing him. I think having all of the superpowered characters be characters who fought in World War I is a really clever choice, because World War I was a disaster for the people involved. Like, all wars are bad, but World War I was dying in trenches for nothing. So you do have some sympathy for soldiers from that war because of how horrible it was, how a lot of them were tricked into fighting. Again, that's something you could say about all wars, but it's a really interesting way to both connect all of the main characters with superpowers, but also with someone like Flint, make you kind of feel for him. Same goes for Tombstone, who we'll talk about. One other thing about Flint, though, and this is something that I appreciate about the color version of the production, is that sometimes it looks like Flint is wearing a white suit, but in reality it is a sandy tan colored suit. This show does a great job of dressing characters in like their signature color. Flint does have his, but yeah, Flint was fine. Then you have Tombstone, and we're going up in terms of characters I found compelling. I really like this version of Lonnie Lincoln. And yes, he is not ever, I believe in the narrative, called Tombstone, but Lonnie Lincoln, the character, is traditionally Tombstone, a Spider-Man villain. One that people are familiar with from a lot of different places. First of all, maybe from the comics. Big player in the comics. He's a big player in the 90s animated series. He's a big player in the Spectacular Spider-Man. He's in the video games. A version of Lonnie Lincoln showed up in the new Spider-Man cartoon, although they played him very differently. And then Tombstone is rumored to be in Spider-Man Brand New Day. So that's cool. So this is a character we have a fair amount of precedent for. I'm only bringing this up because this version of Lonnie Lincoln is not very much like Tombstone. I guess he has a connection to organized crime. He also has a connection to Robbie Robertson by the end of the series, which in the comics, he and Robbie Robertson grew up together. But besides that, I think it's really strange that this character is Lonnie Lincoln, because I don't see why you don't just make him Rhino, or the one I think actually makes more sense, Beetle, based on his power presentation. Because Lonnie Lincoln is bulletproof and super strong, which is something that's true of Tombstone. However, Tombstone usually has gray, impenetrable skin, whereas what this character seems to have is an exoskeleton. Now, if I just saw that character and had no idea it was supposed to be Tombstone, I think I would just assume it's Rhino because of the plating and because of the headpiece that he gets. But I get it, Rhino's a Russian guy, he wouldn't fit the role properly. Although I'm sure you could just change the name and have him be called the Rhino. But then, you got Beetle. Now, Abner Jenkins is a Spider-Man villain who uses technology, whatever. But I think this plating reminds me most of like the carapax that you would recognize on a beetle or an insect. That exoskeleton. That's just what this character looks like, especially the headpiece. Because I know I said the headpiece sells Rhino, but it's not a Rhino horn. It's weird. Also, while Lonnie Lincoln traditionally is black, he also has albinism. And I think maybe if we weren't getting Tombstone with albinism in Spider-Man Brand New Day, probably, played by Crondon, I think maybe people would be upset. It would be a big deal. Because it's like, why are you taking this part of the character away? But A, this feels like Tombstone in name only. And B, if you want an accurate Tombstone, he'll be in the movie. Part of me wonders if at some point in like the scripting, this character was Rhino, but then they just had to change it because of how bad the Kraven movie was and how bad the association with Rhino was for Spider-Man. I don't know. That's just like a weird theory. But I love a good villain turned hero. We get a little bit of that with Sandman, to be fair, and a very cool bit where he gets straight into glass. But you feel more for Tombstone because you see him brought into the group. And he's clearly uncomfortable with it. It would have been so easy, too, because they do put the plating on him. Why not just make the plating white or silver or something? I don't know. It's weird. So surprise, surprise, my favorite villain is Megawatt, Dirk Layden, played by Andrew Caldwell. I didn't expect him to be this fun, but I like pretty much everything about him. And first of all, to be very clear, this is not Electro. I know some people thought this was Electro, and he does name himself Megawatt in the show. So, that's helpful. I don't mind. Megawatt is a character from the comic. He appeared in one Spider-Man comic and was an actor. So if you look at just his personality, like, why do Megawatt? Because this version's an actor. In the comics, he's also just a guy who gets his powers from experiments, although he doesn't get them from that exact character. It is funny looking at Megawatt's first fight with Spider-Man, and seeing how that parallels Electro's fight with Spider-Man in Amazing Spider-Man 2. So it's a similar situation and say, like, people are seeing me, I am getting attention, I want to fight you, Spider-Man, for attention. Even though those characters are obviously very different. Also, as much as I think the name Megawatt is fine, A, there is already a guy named Electro. So you're always going to be compared to that. B, there's another guy in Marvel Comics called Killer Watt, who's now going by Blue Bolt. So another Watt guy doesn't work. But then C, when Robbie's editor suggests Conductor because he is a subway driver, I'm like, yeah, that's the perfect name for this guy. Like, that's a great name. Robbie, I don't know what you're looking for, but like, you struck gold and you got to let him have this one. I love the overacting here. I think part of why is because every other villain plays it kind of small, right? Flint, Tombstone, like, they're powerful, they're serious, but they're not yelling, they're not having fun, they're not making jokes. And while some of Silverman's main henchmen are there for comedic purposes, they're also not really having fun or anything like that. Silverman is enjoying himself, but because of his class and because of how he thinks he should behave, he doesn't let himself have this kind of fun either. It is always great on a show like this to have at least one character who loves having superpowers. He doesn't want to lose them. He wants to use them to get what he wants, especially if his powers are helpful powers like electricity is good for fighting Spider-Man. I think it's great that Megawatt shows up when he does. And I don't think the show is kind of losing steam, but he's a shot in the arm as far as the energy of the series is concerned, and his introduction makes a ton of difference. Also, electricity powers are cool, especially at this time. I did not consider that Spider-Man Noir would be fighting an electricity villain in a time where electricity is not as prevalent as it is now. But there's still plenty of it, and it's still really dangerous for Spider-Man. But then you get to the thing I really love about Megawatt, the way his powers work, although this isn't consistent throughout the entire show. But at least his first fight, I love A, he cannot generate electricity. He can store it, but he has to take it from somewhere and he can run out of it. But then also, he can't just shoot you with electricity. Yes, he kind of does that to the cat at the end of the last fight. But for the most part, if he wants to send electricity to you, he needs you to be near something that's conductive, and he needs to transfer the electricity to something that's conductive. Spider-Man's webs are good for this, but also like a car can be helpful for this. I like this reinvention of an electricity villain in Spider-Man because Electro is one of those characters who I do think is a little overpowered, and having him work this way would make him fun. The same way that Pyro cannot create fire, he can only control it. I wish this is how we did Electro in the future. It's not that he can't control electricity, it's just that he can't create it, and he can't just toss it at you. Maybe he would need, like, some electric wires that he whips around, and once he makes contact with you, then you're done. That would make fights with Electro so much better. So it would be way more interesting for the audience and Spider-Man to figure out how to beat this guy in the moment. I also really like the electricity effect on the face. I mentioned how I think this is kind of a budget version of a Spider-Man movie. Sure, sometimes you want to have Electro be a character who can always glow, but that's not even always true of Electro. Jamie Foxx's version of Electro in Amazing Spider-Man 2 is closer to the Ultimate Spider-Man version of Electro, where Jamie Foxx is Electro in Spider-Man No Way Home, the one from the end of the movie. That's closer to what Electro is, so it doesn't need all that much going on besides a little bit of electricity on the face. I think that's perfect. And I love that part of the Spider strategy is that he's going to wear Megawatt out, so he is out of electricity, and then he can't really do anything. Like, again, this is maybe my favorite version of Enna Electro type, even though he is not specifically Electro. Also, like, and maybe this is just me not being an enormous Spider-Man fan, Max Dillon is not a character who I think has an incredible amount of personality. He's not one that I have really strong feelings about. So if they were taking liberties and wanted to kind of reinvent the character like this, and also maybe make him an actor, because I like that he likes the Broadway marquees and he sucks the power from that. Everything about this character is perfect. I also really appreciate that he's volatile, that he's the wild card in this group. You know, this is just a great character. And he dies in a really funny way. Just getting tossed into an oncoming train and exploded. That's wonderful. So yeah, those are the Sinister Three. 4, I guess, if you count Silverman. Then you've got Kat Hardy, played here by Lee Jun-lee. She's great. This character could have her own show. I don't think she necessarily needs to, but like, this character's got a lot going on, and she's incredibly fun to watch. It is crazy that outside of Felicity Jones in Amazing Spider-Man 2, we have not had an on-screen adaptation of Black Cat, and even that version of her barely was Black Cat because she just didn't do any Black Cat stuff. This is the closest we've gotten to an adaptation of Black Cat, and she's not even that much like Black Cat. Doesn't really have a cat theme. Her name is Cat, so that's why, you know, the cat connection exists. She doesn't really have luck powers. I guess you would say maybe she's unlucky, people around her are unlucky. That's kind of true of everybody in the show. She flirts with Spider-Man. That's really the most important thing you need to be Black Cat. It doesn't dress like Black Cat. That's not a problem necessarily. And I think the traditional Black Cat outfit from the comics, especially with the black fur lining, would translate pretty well to a costume in a show like this. But I think the big test for this character is, would she, being someone who is younger than Nick Cage by a significant amount, and also just out of his league, especially in the context of this show, would she be able to conceivably flirt with him? And the answer is yes. They work so well together. And it's the writing, it's the editing, it's everything. But I think the chemistry in those scenes is something that's just really hard to fake. And if it wasn't there, so much of the beginning of this season wouldn't work. The scene in episode 1 where Cat Hardy sings Dream a Little Dream for Me, electric. One of the best scenes in the series. So much so that I was kind of hoping that there would be one of those in every episode of the show. You would always go to the club and there'd be something going on. Maybe it wouldn't even always be her, but there'd be some performance. Pretty sure the Luke Cage show was pretty good about that. In the first season at least, Harlem's Paradise always had an act. I understand why we can't have that be constant in the show, but man, it just looked so good. Sounded great. It got very creative with the camera angles. There's certain shots where she's not even singing. It's terrific. I also love that Cat Hardy figures out that he's a spider pretty quickly and does the Lois Lane Superman 2 gambit of jumping out a window and see if he'll catch her. She obviously hasn't seen Amazing Spider-Man 2. We all know how that usually goes. But maybe part of why this works is because the spider doesn't just catch her in one place. He catches her on the legs and then also on the boobs or something. So that maybe is able to distribute the shock of the catch so her neck doesn't break. But again, I think she has great chemistry with Nicolas Cage. Honestly, my main thought coming out of this season is she leaves with Flint and I'm she's too good for him too. She should be doing her own thing for a little bit. Flint's kind of an idiot. But yeah, Cat Hardy was my favorite performance in the series, in a series with a lot of performances I really liked. It's a very Spider-Man thing for the villains in the stories to have the most memorable roles. Even though Spider-Man and his friends are doing a great job, between Brendan Gleeson Silverman, Lee Jun-Lee Cat Hardy, and Andrew Lewis Caldwell Megawatt, bring an amazing amount of personality to these characters. You got some others. Dr. Faber, really weird mad scientist type character. The idea that her son ages very fast is funny as a superpower. It is also funny the way these superpowers manifest. They do the thing where they kind of explain they use DNA from animals and things to create us. But Megawatt, you'd figure it's electric eels. Tombstone, it is rhinos or something like that. I don't know what Sandman's powers are. I don't know what powers make you age really fast. I guess a lot of insects age really fast. It's only funny to me because there are a lot of Spider-Man villains that are animals. You could do this, and they are going to do this, I have a feeling, in the second season of the Spider-Man cartoon. Because a lot of the first season Spider-Man villains were enhanced by some sort of technology. It seems like the second season, now that we have Spider-Man blood, and we've spent a little time with Dr. Connors, I feel we can get a lot of the Spider-Man villains that are based on animals, of which there are quite a few. Got Hammerhead, the Lizard, Vulture, Black Cat could show up in that show. All I'm saying is, if that was the plan, it's interesting which villains they chose, considering there are other villains that might make a little bit more sense, but then you don't get to do Sandman, so what's the fun in that? Let's talk about the giant spider guy. I remember seeing him in a trailer and going, oh, this is probably a dream sequence or something. I thought maybe there's a chance we're doing Man Spider and Nicolas Cage mutates into Man Spider at some point, but that just didn't seem realistic. I was shocked when it turned out the spider got his powers from being bitten by a radioactive Spider-Man. And the guy that bit him was half spider on one side of his face. I imagine that's supposed to be a take on the classic Spider-Man illustration where you can see half of Peter's face covered by the mask. This is usually when he's in the civilian identity and he gets some spider sense. He has a spider thought. That's how that'll get represented sometimes. This is kind of, I feel a bit of that, but hideous, gross. Nothing else in the show is really like this. There's some bits where Dr. Faber has a weird experiment, but for the most part, this looks like your pretty standard superhero show. There's very little I would be kid's not going to like this. I mean, there's stuff kid might be bored by, but nothing I think that's going to upset a child. Until this part, and only this part. Other side characters, you got Frankie. What a weird little guy. The little streetwise kid who's helping Ben Reilly out and seems to kind of live with him or something. It's very silly, but I do think he serves a pretty good purpose as the series goes on. So I don't mind having him around. On the same token, on the other side of the coin, the Mooks. Silverman's unnamed henchmen. I mean, they have a name, but they're not like named superhero characters. But the two that do the routine that you're familiar with from comics, the smart one smacks the dumb one on the back of the head. When Spider-Noir clonks their heads together, they make a bowling pin sound. Like, great, very fun. Every character in this show is doing something fun, and I appreciate that. Let's talk about the action. I think for an 8-episode series on Amazon Prime about Spider-Man, this is about as good as I think we could get. There are several bits of Spider-Man action that take place in the light of day, specifically the fight scene in episode 2. And like, while that doesn't look perfect, Spider-Man's a little bouncier than even Spider-Man should probably be. Considering that this is a Spider-Man television show, I think this looks really good. But like, I think this fight scene works. I think this is maybe the shakiest the CGI looks for me. And like I said, I feel like I'm a little forgiving when it comes to effects that don't look amazing. I do think these fights are lit very well. Like, a good chunk of them take place at night because it's noir and you can see everything. And that is, I know, a very low bar to clear just generally, is like you could see the things on the screen, but very practically lit, very deliberately on sets in real locations, force them to make sure that this is all very visible. More productions need to do that because it makes such a big difference. You know, really everything about the show I like. Costuming, like I said, is great. I think the mystery, while not incredibly difficult to solve, especially as the audience who knows who the spider is, it's well put together enough to keep you engaged. You know, I think if anybody comes out of this as a big star, because I want to say it's Lee Jin-Lee, right? That's the closest we have to like a breakout performance here. She's made it into a lot of the marketing. And on the other hand, she was in Sinners. You know, she was in Babylon. I feel like she's getting some play. But yeah, I think her and Andrew Lewis Caldwell come out the best of this series. And I mean, like Nicolas Cage, you know, this is one of those roles that I think he needs to do more of. And this thing with Nicolas Cage, he's always given it 100%, almost all the time. I don't know. I'm sure I've seen something I didn't like him in. I don't know, like that Jiu-Jitsu movie that released during COVID wasn't very good. And like, I don't remember him being amazing in it. But like, if you look at everything he's made since then, you've got some real fun performances. You've got Willy's Wonderland, Pig, which Pig is an incredible movie, and he's wonderful in it. Probably the best performance on this list. Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent. Fun. Renfield, a trailer that I quite liked, and a movie that I thought was fine. There's a little bit in The Flash, which is stupid, and that part of the movie is stupid, but like it's kind of cool to see him in the Superman costume. Dream Scenario, which I think is great. Long Legs, which is another big swing. And then this. And he's got Beyond the Spider-Verse coming out. Apparently a Lords of War, like Lord of War sequel. He might be in the next season of True Detective. He's John Madden in that Madden biopic. Like Nicolas Cage, love him or hate him, he's doing stuff. And he's continuing to be relevant. I think this might introduce a new audience to Nicolas Cage who maybe only knew him through Into the Spider-Verse, but like you don't get a sense for his personality there, but you see him in this, you're like, oh, that guy's awesome. I'm gonna go back and watch Con Air. You know, I'm gonna go back and watch Raising Arizona. I'm gonna go back and watch the second Ghost Rider movie, which is definitely at least better than the first one. He has a fascinating career. I know the Community episode made a joke about it, and like this observation has been made before, but his career has not stopped being interesting since then, and I really respect that. Do I think we get a second season of the show? I'm 50-50 on it. On one hand, it's expensive, and it's a streaming show, and nobody knows whether those make money or how they're worthwhile or what. On the other hand, critics really like it. I think audiences really like it. I wish they advertised it more. I think a second season would do really well. That's the trouble with a lot of these streaming shows. The first season, they see how it does, and if it's a hit, then the second season they advertise it, they push it. Obviously, there's still a ton of Spider-Man characters, villains, heroes that you could obviously add in. You can explore so much of this universe. I think it would be smart to have him fight Nazis. I wouldn't mind if we just push the timeline of the show up, whatever, 5-10 years, whatever it's going to take for this character to be involved in World War II. I don't think this is going to win awards, and I don't think this is going to sell anything. Those are the two things. Like, if it does either of them, that means it gets renewed, but it's hard to tell if that's going to happen here. So let's see what happens. If you go on Amazon.com, look up Spider-Noir, like, there's not merchandise you could buy. You could buy the Spider-Man Noir comics, which are fine, and you can buy an Amazon exclusive action figure, which I probably will get, because I don't have any from the other movie. But like, A, that's not really based off the version from this because he has a grappling hook. And B, like, that could exist on its own. If they had a line of figures specific to the series, I'd say, hey, maybe that works. Maybe if that sells well, that's enough to get this renewed. I don't know. But also, if I'm Amazon, I want to have a Spider-Man show. I would want to keep this going. I want to have Nicolas Cage continue to be invested in the success of this series and in the network. What villains do you do? I have absolutely no idea. I've never had less of an idea than right now. it seems like maybe part of why they use specific villains that they chose here, that could be because these are low-profile Spider-Man villains. So like maybe the thought process is like figure out some low-profile Spider-Man villains that would fit well in this setting. Also, ones that don't have incredibly complicated superpowers. On one hand, guys like Mysterio could work, which would be especially interesting in this time period because filmmaking is so different. He can't have drones. It does have to be like practical effects. That would be pretty cool. I would like to see Swarm because he is bees and that's a Nicolas Cage thing, and also because Nazis. I made a video about that. Also haven't they done anything with. Jackal has never been in anything before. Pretty sure Spider-Man has a villain named Vermin. He's never been in anything before, to my knowledge. Hammerhead hasn't shown up in anything. And Hammerhead is like a character who, specifically in the modern day, kind of acts like a mobster from this time. Because honestly, he might be the most sensible character that I expect to show up next season. I'd also like to see like a character from his past, like a romantic interest, who could be like your Gwen Stacy or something like that. But I don't think that's necessary. Maybe El Muerto, he could show up. Why not? Silver Sable, that's another pretty high-profile Spider-Man villain that hasn't shown up in anything. And she's like an anti-hero. If you want like an actual big science fiction special effects villain, Jack-o'-lantern is a big Spider-Man character. Has never appeared in any live-action medium. Looks pretty cool. Also not that complicated to put together. Also, it would be fun to see Nick Cage go up against a flaming skull guy, even if the skull is a pumpkin, but still, it's a Ghost Rider connection. That's kind of fun. I think you also want to give him an ally, but I don't know which one you would put in here. Spider-Man allies are tricky, especially now that Robbie's already in the picture. I do think pulling out Nex like Hallows Eve, who comes back into the story, that could be fun. But, we haven't gotten any confirmation that they're going to do another season of this. I would also be fine with doing another season of a Spider-Man thing, but that not being Spider-Noir. Like, do an animated Spider-Ham season. We get a season of this, season of that, season of Penny Parker. Like, make it a Spider-Man anthology. That could be a cool way for it not to feel stale, but for it to be a brand that people are familiar with. But if that's what we're doing, I do think you do want to put a little bit more work into connecting it to Into the Spider-Verse. And maybe with this story, it's just this all happened before Into the Spider-Verse. Like, everything in Spider-Noir is pre-Into the Spider-Verse. And in Into the Spider-Verse, he's like a 70-year-old man, considering he says he fought Nazis. I don't know. I think that's doable. But yeah, this is one of my favorite shows of the year. We've had a lot of really fun shows this year. Widow's Bay, obviously. I talk about that in every video these days. Night of the Seven Kingdoms, it was great. We've had Wonder Man. Everybody liked Wonder Man. Daredevil was cool. And then we got this, which sure, it's not the most dramatic, like compelling television show. It's not going to win all the Emmys, but it was a lot of fun. I think a lot of people liked it. I guess the other question, do you do Venom? Will Venom work in a medium like this since he's already in black and white? Do you do Aliens at all? Maybe that is where, like, Man-Wolf comes in. But Man-Wolf has to be an astronaut, so it wouldn't make sense because they don't exist yet. And that reminds me of a video I watched recently by a channel called Curious Archives called The Flesh of the Cosmos. The video is about why so many extraterrestrial, extra-dimensional characters and races and, like, universes are depicted as being fleshy. Stranger Things is the best example of this, but the video also cites Venom as an example of this occurring, and even talks about the King in Black because of how these characters used to be decentralized and they're not anymore, and why that is. It's really interesting. Their Gods and Monsters series, which this is a part of, talks about all kinds of horror phenomenon and how they're related to mythology and history, and you can find that video in that series exclusively on this video sponsor, Nebula. Nebula is a subscription streaming platform that I and a bunch of other YouTubers you probably already love helped to create. First thing that's important, all of our videos go up there early and ad-free. So if you want to be the first person to see one of my Nando V movies or Nando Cut videos, Nebula is for you. And then there are series like Jetlag or Tom Scott's England, where they go up on Nebula a week before they go anywhere else. Then we also have Nebula exclusive series of videos, like Tom Nicholas has a series called Slow News Day. Captain Midnight has a series called Showrunners, where he looks at different people that have created television shows. The first episode is about Rod Serling in The Twilight Zone. The second episode is about Vince Gilligan in Breaking Bad. Looks at the journey of how they got to where they were and how that shaped the series they would showrun. And then Curious Archives Gods and Monsters series looks at these different legendary creatures from religion and mythology and talks about how the ideas of those creatures has evolved over time and they've turned into pop culture characters. So you can find all that great stuff exclusively on Nebula. And a year of Nebula is already a steal at $60 a year. That is $5 a month. But if you go to go.nebula.tv/thenandocut, you can get Nebula for just $2.50 a month. That is $30 for the year. It's an awesome deal. Go check it out. I guarantee there is a creator you already love who's part of Nebula, and if you spend some time on Nebula, I bet you'll find your new favorite creator. After me, of course. Your second favorite creator, because I'm your favorite. Don't correct me. Again, that is go.nebula.tv/thenandocut. So thank you for watching Spider-Man trailer. Probably coming out the day I put this out, so there'll be a lot of Spider-Man talk, and maybe one of these days I'll do this video but for Wonder Man. Stay safe. I'll see you guys around.